I am Mara Ellison, and I am 41 years old. The moment my husband stepped away from the hospital bed, the heart monitor lost all restraint. It didn't beep. It screamed. Not the polite, controlled sound you hear on television dramas, but a shrill, panicked wail that cut through the ICU like a fire alarm meant for the soul. Nurses reacted instantly. Too instantly. Shoes squeaked against the floor. A card appeared out of nowhere. Someone shouted numbers I refused to translate into meaning. And beneath the thin white sheet, my son's body jerked once, sharp, violent, before going terrifyingly still. Before we continue, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may be living them silently, without words for what they're carrying. I noticed the wrong details first. The absurd ones. The way my husband, Caleb Ellison, still had his tailored coat buttoned, as if he'd only stopped by for coffee instead of standing beside his unconscious child. The faint crease in his trousers, sharp enough to cut glass. The way he checked his watch, not dramatically, not guiltily, just automatically, like a man realizing he was late for a meeting instead of standing in a room where time was actively breaking apart. "I can't do this," he said. There was no crack in his voice. No tremble. No sign of fear. Just irritation, as if the room had made an unreasonable request of him. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were locked around the metal rail of the hospital bed, so tightly that sensation had drained from my fingers. Somewhere behind me, a nurse yelled for a crash cart. The monitor screamed louder, its pitch climbing like it was panicking for all of us. "I didn't sign up for this," Caleb added, softer now, as if lowering his voice somehow made the words less cruel. Then he took a step back. Just one. And then he turned and walked out. No last look at our son. No pause. No hesitation. Just the quiet, devastating click of his polished shoes against the floor, fading down the corridor until the sound dissolved into nothing. When the automatic doors hissed shut behind him, something inside me sealed just as tightly, like a door I didn't yet know how to reopen. I stayed. I stayed while doctors flooded my son's veins with medication and argued in urgent whispers over his body. I stayed while machines fought to keep him tethered to this world. I stayed when a nurse gently suggested I sit down, and I told her, politely, calmly, that if I let go of that bed, I might collapse into pieces too small to put back together. Time stretched into something unrecognizable. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like entire lifetimes being negotiated breath by breath. Eventually, the screaming machine settled into a grudging rhythm. My son's chest rose again, shallow, mechanical, assisted. Alive. For now. Only then did it register fully. Caleb hadn't come back. Not after 5 minutes. Not after 10. Not after a nurse brought me water I never drank. Not after the doctor cleared his throat and said the words that rearranged my entire future. "Severe traumatic brain injury," he said carefully, like each word needed permission to exist. "If he wakes up, things may be different." Different. Doctors love that word. It covers everything from a limp to a lifetime. I nodded like I understood. Inside, I was screaming. I looked down at my son, Ethan. My bright, quiet boy with ink-stained fingers and a habit of sketching in the margins of his schoolbooks. Tubes crossed his body like cruel punctuation marks. His head was wrapped in thick white bandages that made him look smaller. Younger. Fragile in a way that hollowed me out from the inside. "I'm here," I whispered, pressing my forehead gently to his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." The nurse beside me offered a tight smile. The kind worn by people who have seen this scene too many times to count. I wondered how often she saw the other version, the one where both parents stayed. Hours passed. Maybe more. Time had stopped behaving like something measurable. Eventually, reality landed in full. I was alone. I pulled my phone from my bag. No missed calls. No voicemails. Just one text message sent earlier, while our son was still fighting for his life. "I need space. Don't call." I laughed. It came out sharp and wrong, startling a nurse walking past the doorway. Space. Yes. Caleb had always needed that. Space from mess. Space from inconvenience. Space from anything that couldn't be fixed with money, charm, or distance. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket and returned to holding Ethan's hand. That was when I felt it. Something cool and solid pressed against my palm beneath the blanket. Not part of the machines. Not part of him. Frowning, I gently shifted his fingers and reached into the pocket of the jeans he'd been wearing when the ambulance brought him in. My heart began to race, not from fear, but instinct. The kind mothers develop when something is wrong in a way that doesn't announce itself. My fingers closed around a small metal object. A key. Plain. Silver. Old-fashioned. Tied to it was a scrap of paper folded so many times it felt soft as cloth. My breath caught as I unfolded it. The handwriting was Ethan's, messy, rushed, determined. "Mom, if something happens, don't trust him. Use this." The room tilted. I stared at the words until they blurred, then looked up at the door my husband had walked through. He hadn't just left us. He'd left at the exact moment he thought he could. I closed my fist around the key and leaned closer to my son, my voice steady even as my world cracked clean in half. "He stayed," I whispered. "And whatever this is, I'll finish it." Outside, somewhere beyond the sterile walls and humming machines, my husband was walking away. Inside, the real story was just beginning. Before hospitals became my entire world, there had been warning signs. Quiet ones. Small cracks I dismissed as cosmetic instead of structural. I ignored them the way people ignore a hairline fracture in a wall, assuming it was nothing serious because it hadn't collapsed yet. The night Ethan collapsed didn't begin with sirens or panic. It began with silence. The wrong kind. The kind that stretches just long enough for your instincts to start screaming. I was in the kitchen, my hands dusted with flour, irritated that he hadn't answered when I called his name. Teenagers specialize in selective hearing. I expected a grunt. Maybe an eye roll. Instead, I found him on the floor of his room. His sketchbook lay open beside him. A half-finished drawing stared up at me, dark lines, jagged shapes, something urgent and unresolved. His body was twisted at an angle my brain refused to process. Time fractured. I don't remember screaming, but neighbors later told me they heard it. I remember dialing emergency services with fingers that didn't feel attached to my body. I remember Caleb standing in the doorway, frozen, already backing away emotionally even as his body remained in the room. "He probably fainted," he said. Probably. That word followed me all the way to the hospital. In the ambulance, Ethan lay strapped to a stretcher, oxygen mask fogging with every shallow breath. I held his hand. Caleb sat up front, silent, scrolling on his phone as if the right headline might save us. At the hospital, doctors moved fast. Nurses asked questions that felt absurdly detailed. Allergies. Medications. Dates. Times. Caleb answered when spoken to, but his voice had already detached itself from the moment. When they wheeled Ethan into imaging, Caleb finally spoke. "This is a lot," he said. I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I hadn't wanted to see before. Not fear. Calculation. "If this turns into long-term care," he continued, "we need to be realistic." Realistic. I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to. The scans came back. The doctor's expression did not soften. Swelling. Trauma. Uncertainty. Watching and waiting. Waiting, I learned, is where weak people reveal themselves. By the time Ethan was moved to intensive care, Caleb was pacing the hallway, not with worry but restlessness. Like a man stuck in traffic. "I have calls I can't miss," he said. "This could go on for weeks." "He's our child," I replied quietly. He flinched, as if the word had suddenly become negotiable. When the doctor explained the risks, coma, impairment, the possibility that Ethan might not wake at all, I felt the ground vanish beneath me. Caleb felt something else entirely. "This isn't what I planned my life to be," he said. That was when a door slammed shut inside my chest. And by the time the machines later screamed and the nurses rushed in, my husband had already decided. He would leave. And I would stay. The first night after my husband left, sleep became a foreign concept. I sat upright in a rigid plastic chair, clearly designed by someone who had never grieved in it. The chair bruised my back and numbed my legs, but I didn't move. Moving felt dangerous, like if I shifted even an inch, the fragile balance keeping my son alive might shatter. I counted breaths. In. Out. I memorized the rhythm of the machines the way people memorize prayers. The heart monitor beeped in a pattern I learned to recognize. Too fast meant panic. Too slow meant dread. I watched my son's chest rise and fall as if my attention alone could anchor him to the bed. Nurses rotated in and out. Some spoke softly, explaining every adjustment as if words could soften the reality. Others worked in silence, efficient and distant, like people who had learned not to carry every story home with them. I learned the difference between footsteps that brought updates and footsteps that brought nothing at all. No one asked where my husband was. They never do. By morning, my phone began to vibrate constantly. Messages stacked on top of each other like unwanted advice. Maybe he just needs time. Men handle stress differently. At least one of you is strong. I stared at the screen and wondered how strength had become synonymous with being abandoned. I didn't reply. I didn't have the energy to explain that strength didn't feel noble. It felt lonely, heavy, sharp around the edges. Late that afternoon, a hospital social worker pulled a chair close to mine. She held a clipboard and wore compassion like a practiced skill. Her voice was gentle, measured. "Do you have support?" she asked. "Family? A partner?" "My husband stepped out," I said. She nodded slowly, the way people do when they've heard that sentence too many times to be surprised by it. "We'll need to discuss contingencies," she continued. "Long-term care planning, financial responsibility, decision-making authority." Each word landed like a stone. I nodded again, because nodding was easier than admitting how unprepared I was for the life rearranging itself in front of me. That night, when the lights dimmed and the ward settled into its uneasy quiet, doubt crept in. It was subtle at first. Polite. It asked questions instead of making accusations. What if my husband was right? What if this broke me? What if staying meant losing everything I was? There were moments, real ones, when I stared at the door and imagined walking through it. Just once. Just to breathe without machines deciding whether my child was winning or losing. To survive those moments, I developed dark humor. I named the heart monitor Gerald because Gerald was dramatic and screamed over nothing. The 4-pump became Karen because it beeped when it absolutely did not need to. I whispered insults to them under my breath and earned concerned glances from nurses who didn't know humor was the only thing keeping me intact. Days blurred into weeks. My son didn't wake. Paperwork multiplied. Insurance forms. Consent documents. Financial statements that made my head ache. Bills arrived anyway, indifferent to grief or circumstance. Still no husband. When he finally called, it wasn't to ask about his son. It was about the house. "I'm staying with a friend," he said, like this was a temporary inconvenience. "I'll need some things." I waited, counted seconds, gave him room to say the thing that mattered. He didn't. "Do you want to see him?" I asked finally. There was a pause, long uncomfortable. "I think it's better if I remember him how he was," he said. The laugh that escaped me was sharp and broken. It surprised even me. "You mean before responsibility," I replied. The line went dead not long after. That night, after the nurses dimmed the lights, I pulled the key from my pocket. I had been carrying it everywhere, rubbing my thumb against the cool metal like a talisman. My son had trusted me. Not his father. Me. That mattered. Eventually, exhaustion forced me home to shower and change clothes. The house felt hollow. Not loud. Not dramatic. Efficiently empty. His shoes were gone. His side of the bed untouched. The absence was surgical. I walked into my son's room and stood there longer than I meant to. The smell of graphite and paper still lingered. His desk was cluttered the way only creative minds allow. Chaos with a system no one else understands. That was when I noticed it. A loose panel beneath the desk. It wasn't obvious. It had never been obvious. It was the kind of thing you'd only notice if you spent time looking instead of passing through. My husband had never really looked. Inside the compartment was a notebook and a small data drive. My hands shook as I opened the notebook. "Mom, if you're reading this," I couldn't say it out loud. I sank to the floor. The crying that came wasn't loud. It didn't have the energy for sound. It was the kind of crying that empties you out completely, leaving nothing behind but ache. The pages that followed weren't emotional rants or wild accusations. They were careful, methodical. Dates, times, conversations overheard from the hallway. Things said when my husband thought no one was listening. Patterns, plans, a life that quietly excluded us. There were notes about money, about travel, about decisions already made. The truth settled slowly, like poison diluted just enough to hurt longer. My husband hadn't left because our son was sick. He had left because staying would have trapped him in a life where he couldn't pretend he was the hero. I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest. In that quiet room, surrounded by sketches and unfinished dreams, another promise formed. Not loud, not dramatic, but unbreakable. I would stay for my son. And I would stay long enough for the truth to catch up with the man who ran. The next weeks were brutal in ways no one prepares you for. My son remained unconscious, suspended between worlds, while I learned how to exist in limbo. I learned which doctors told the truth gently and which ones hid behind statistics. I learned how to advocate without falling apart. I learned how to sign forms with steady hands, even when my insides were shaking. Occasionally, my husband sent messages. Carefully worded. Vague. He spoke about stress. About pressure. About needing time to think. He never asked how his son was doing. I stopped responding. Staying changed me. It sharpened my focus. Stripped away hesitation. Made decisions simpler. Not easier, simpler. While my son lay in that bed, I started rebuilding our lives quietly. Conversations with professionals who knew how to read between lines. Paperwork that protected what mattered. Small, deliberate steps that added up to something solid. The notebook became a roadmap. Not for revenge. For clarity. And clarity, I learned, is dangerous. My husband's version of events began to unravel under scrutiny. Timelines didn't match. Numbers told stories he hadn't intended to share. The more I stayed, the less room there was for his lies to hide. Weak people think leaving erases responsibility. They're wrong. It only delays the reckoning. By the time my son's fingers twitched for the first time, barely noticeable, almost imagined, I knew something else too. Whatever came next, I wasn't afraid of it anymore. Staying had already cost me everything that could be taken. What remained was unmovable. The morning my son opened his eyes did not arrive with drama. No swelling music. No sudden clarity. It came quietly, disguised as another gray day, rain tapping softly against the tall ICU windows like it had done 100 times before. I was counting breaths again, whispering Gerald's rhythm under my breath, when something changed. At first, I thought exhaustion was playing tricks on me. His lashes fluttered. Once. Then again. I leaned forward so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. A nurse glanced in, then froze when she saw what I saw. His fingers, thin, pale, stubborn, tightened weakly around mine. "Mom," he whispered. The sound broke something open inside me. I laughed and cried at the same time, a jagged, unhinged noise that sent the nurse rushing fully into the room. "Yes," I said, pressing my forehead to his hand, afraid to let go even for a second. "I'm here." I stayed. They warned me later not to overwhelm him. Not to cry too hard. Not to talk too much. But in that moment, nothing could have pulled me away. The machines were still there. The risk was still real. But he was back, confused, fragile, alive. Recovery did not move in straight lines. Some days felt like victories. Others felt like cruel jokes. Physical therapy left him exhausted and angry. Words slipped away mid-sentence. His hands shook when he tried to draw. He threw his pencil once, furious at the betrayal of his own body, then immediately apologized like the old him would have. "It's not fair," he said one afternoon, staring at his hands. "No," I replied honestly. "It isn't." Doctors spoke in cautious optimism. Progress measured in millimeters. Improvements so small they barely registered until they stacked into something undeniable. Through all of it, I stayed. For every appointment. Every setback. Every moment when frustration burned behind his eyes and fear sat heavy in the room. That was when my phone buzzed. I heard he's awake. Maybe I can stop by. Maybe. The word sat on the screen like an insult. I didn't reply immediately. I looked at my son instead. He was sleeping, mouth slightly open, one hand curled loosely against his chest. He looked younger than his years. Softer. Like the world hadn't yet taken its swing at him. Finally, I typed 3 words. "We'll discuss later." My husband showed up a week later. He stood in the doorway like a man who had wandered into the wrong theater, uncertain of his role. He brought flowers, cheap ones, and wore a careful expression that tried to balance regret and self-preservation. His apology never quite apologized. It circled responsibility without touching it. "This has been hard on me," he began. I almost laughed him out of the room. My son watched him closely. Illness had taken some things from him, but awareness wasn't one of them. His gaze was sharp. Quiet. Measuring. "You left," my son said simply. The words landed harder than any accusation I could have made. My husband flinched. "I needed space," he replied quickly. "Your mother understands." I didn't correct him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. Silence did the work for me. The visit ended quickly. Too quickly for redemption. Too long for comfort. After that, the calls slowed. Then stopped. Consequences rarely arrive loudly. They prefer patience. While my son rebuilt himself, I rebuilt our lives. Paperwork became my second language. Accounts, safeguards, decisions I never imagined needing to make alone. Conversations with professionals who knew how to read between lines and didn't ask questions they didn't want honest answers to. The notebook my son had hidden became a map. Not for revenge. For clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Timelines didn't match my husband's version of events. Financial records told stories he hadn't intended to share. Decisions he claimed were sudden had been planned long before our son collapsed. The more carefully I stayed, the less room there was for his lies to hide. He showed up unannounced the day the final notice arrived. "You did this," he said, eyes wild, voice tight. "You ruined me." I looked at him calmly. Truly calmly. "No," I said. "You left. I stayed. This is just the math." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. For the first time, something clicked. He realized he no longer mattered. He left again that night. This time, there was no door left open for him. Upstairs, my son was asleep. His breathing steady. His sketchbook lay open beside him, pencil resting where his hand had dropped it. The storm had passed. The man who ran had finally reached the place he deserved, outside the story. Morning light filled the kitchen in a way that felt unfamiliar and comforting at the same time. Ordinary. Warm. It touched the chipped mug in my hands and the scattered pencils my son always forgot to put away. He sat across from me, sketching. His movements were steadier now. Not perfect. Deliberate. He paused often, studying the page like the image was negotiating its way out instead of being forced. I watched without hiding it. "You're doing it again," he said, smirking. "Doing what?" Watching me like I might disappear. I smiled into my coffee. Old habits. Recovery taught us patience. Not the inspirational kind people post online. The quiet, grinding kind that shows up every day whether you feel ready or not. Therapy. Practice. Frustration. Breakthroughs so small they felt imaginary until they stacked into something real. My husband tried once more to reframe the story. Emails full of reflection and regret shaped suspiciously like inconvenience. He spoke about fear. Pressure. How anyone might have done the same. I didn't respond. The truth didn't need defending. When everything finished, clean, quiet, irreversible, I felt no triumph. Only relief. The kind that settles deep and stays. My son never asked why his father didn't come back. I think he already knew. Months later, he handed me a drawing. Two figures stood side by side, facing forward. Behind them, an open doorway stood empty. "I called it staying," he said. I swallowed hard. "It's perfect." That night, after he went to bed, I stood in the hallway where my husband had once packed his bags. I remembered the woman I had been, terrified, exhausted, afraid that staying meant losing myself. I had been wrong. Staying didn't shrink me. It sharpened me. It taught me that love isn't proven by promises or plans, but by who remains when leaving would be easier. It taught me that abandonment is loud in the moment, but irrelevant in the end. The world didn't clap when I stayed. No one handed me a medal. But every morning, I wake up in a house filled with laughter again. Every evening, I hear pencils scratching across paper. Every ordinary moment is a victory no one can take from me. My husband walked away from a sick child because he couldn't face uncertainty. I stayed. And that choice saved my son. It saved me. Walking away is easy. Staying is power. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support encourages me to keep sharing stories like this.